continent 94% submerged, nearly two-thirds the size of Australia, exists under the Pacific Ocean. Ancient rock fragments, billions of years old, found on Mauritian beaches point to a microcontinent swallowed by the Indian Ocean. Fishermen in the North Sea have dredged up human tools and mammoth bones from a land that vanished beneath the waves thousands of years ago. Antarctica wasn't always a frozen desert. Fossils reveal it once hosted temperate rainforests near the South Pole. Number 8. The sunken land of Sundaland, Asia's drowned paradise. Imagine a vast tropical landmass, a continuation of mainland Southeast Asia, stretching out like an enormous peninsula. This was Sundaland, an area that today lies mostly submerged beneath the shallow waters of the Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the southern part of the South China Sea. During past ice ages, when massive glaciers locked up huge amounts of the world's water, sea levels were dramatically lower, sometimes by as much as 120 meters, or nearly 400 feet. When this happened, Sundaland emerged, connecting the Malay Peninsula with the islands we now know as Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and Palawan. It wasn't just a narrow bridge. It was a massive, low-lying plain, almost doubling the land area of Southeast Asia at its peak. Scientists know about Sundaland through a variety of methods. Bathymetric surveys, which map the ocean floor, clearly show the outlines of this ancient, drowned landscape. They reveal submerged river valleys, ancient coastlines, and extensive plains that once would have been dry land. These underwater river systems are particularly telling, as they are extensions of rivers still flowing on the islands and mainland today, like the Mekong, Chao, Freya, and Kapuas rivers. Geologists have also studied sediment cores drilled from the seabed. These cores contain layers of soil, pollen, and even peat, which are characteristic of terrestrial environments, not deep-sea ones. Pollen grains found in these cores tell a story of the types of plants that grew there: ancient rainforests, mangrove swamps, and open woodlands. What would Sundaland have been like? Evidence suggests it was a vibrant, tropical world. Think of sprawling rainforests, similar to those still found in parts of Borneo and Sumatra, teeming with life. Large river systems would have meandered across the plains, creating fertile deltas and marshlands. Climate was likely warm and humid, though possibly drier in some areas than the hyperhumid conditions of today's equatorial rainforests. Fossils found on the present-day islands that form the highlands of Sundaland, such as those of early hominids like Homo erectus, and an array of ancient mammals like giant pangolins, stegodons, elephant-like creatures, and ancient tigers, give us clues about the fauna that roamed this extensive land. These animals could move freely across areas now separated by hundreds of miles of sea. The end of Sundaland as a vast contiguous landmass came with the end of the last ice age, starting around 20,000 years ago. As global temperatures rose, ice sheets melted, and sea levels began to creep upwards. This was not a sudden cataclysm, but a gradual inundation over thousands of years. Coastal areas would have slowly turned into marshes, then shallow seas. River valleys would have become estuaries, and then bays. For any humans or animals living on the low-lying plains, it would have been a slow-motion retreat to higher ground, which eventually became the islands we see today. It's thought that this process of submergence took place between about 18,000 and 5,000 years ago. The existence of Sundaland has profound implications for understanding human migration and the distribution of plants and animals in Southeast Asia. It provided a highway for early humans, moving out of Africa and across Asia, potentially reaching Australia. The shared flora and fauna across islands now separated by sea can be explained by their common origin on this single landmass. The gradual flooding of Sundaland might also be reflected in the oral traditions and flood myths of various cultures in the region. Recognizing Sundaland redraws the map of prehistoric Southeast Asia, revealing a lost world that played a critical role in the history of life and humanity in this part of the globe. It shows us that coastlines are not permanent and that vast landscapes can disappear beneath the waves, reshaping ecosystems and influencing the course of evolution. Number 7. Beringia, the mammoth steppe, the joined worlds. Most people have heard of the Bering Land Bridge, but the reality was far grander than a mere bridge. Beringia was an immense subcontinent, a vast Ice Age landmass that connected what is now eastern Siberia in Russia with Alaska in North America. At its greatest extent, it stretched for over 1,000 miles north to south, and perhaps twice that east to west, covering an area estimated to be larger than Texas and Alaska combined. This land appeared when sea levels dropped significantly during glacial periods, exposing the shallow continental shelf beneath the Bering Strait and Chukchi Sea. It wasn't just a narrow corridor. It was a huge habitable region in its own right. Evidence for Beringia comes from multiple scientific fields. Paleogeographers have used sea level data and ocean floor mapping to reconstruct its extent. The relatively shallow depth of the Bering Strait, only about 50 meters or 160 feet deep in places, means that even a modest drop in global sea levels would expose a significant land connection. Fossil evidence is abundant. The frozen soils of Alaska, Yukon, and Siberia have preserved the remains of an incredible array of Ice Age animals, including woolly, mammoths, mastodons, steppe, bison, ancient horses, Yukon wild asses, caribou, muskoxen, saigar-toothed cats, and dire wolves. These animal populations were similar on both the Asian and North American sides, indicating they moved freely across Beringia. Plant fossils, particularly pollen grains, preserved in lake sediments and peat bogs, tell scientists about the vegetation. They indicate a landscape quite different from the modern tundra. Life on Beringia was adapted to a unique environment known as the mammoth steppe, or steppe tundra. It wasn't a dense forest, nor was it a barren, icy wasteland, at least not entirely. During glacial periods, much of Beringia remained unglaciated, unlike large parts of North America and Europe, which were covered by thick ice sheets. This was due to a surprisingly arid climate. There wasn't enough snowfall to build up massive glaciers, even though it was very cold. The landscape was likely a mosaic of dry grasslands, herb-rich tundra, and perhaps some scattered willow and birch shrublands, especially in more sheltered river valleys. This environment supported vast herds of grazing animals, which in turn supported a range of predators. Summer days would have been long, fueling plant growth, while winters would have been harsh, dark, and extremely cold. The disappearance of Beringia was like Sundaland, a result of rising sea levels as the last ice age waned. Starting around 15,000 years ago, the waters began to rise, slowly encroaching on the low-lying plains. Connection between Asia and North America wasn't severed instantly. It likely became a series of islands and peninsulas before the Bering Strait finally opened completely, around 11,000 to 10,000 years ago. This process would have fragmented animal populations and forced human groups to adapt to changing coastlines and resource availability. The mammoth steppe ecosystem itself transformed with warmer, wetter conditions, allowing for the spread of peat bogs, tundra, and eventually boreal forests, which could not support the same density of large grazing animals. This environmental shift, along with potential human hunting pressure, contributed to the extinction of many of the iconic Ice Age megafauna. Beringia's significance in world history and prehistory is immense. It was the primary route for the peopling of the Americas, with groups of hunter-gatherers from Asia crossing over and eventually spreading throughout North and South America. Timing and number of these migrations are still subjects of intense research, but Beringia was the stage upon which this crucial chapter of human history unfolded. For a period, possibly thousands of years, some human populations may have lived in Beringia itself, isolated from both Asia and the rest of North America by ice sheets. This Beringian standstill hypothesis suggests that unique genetic and cultural adaptations might have developed there. Understanding Beringia reshapes our perception of continental connections, showing that what are now separate land masses were once joined, facilitating migrations that have shaped the genetic and cultural diversity of the entire New World. It's a reminder of how dynamic Earth's geography can be. Number 6. Mauritia, the lost microcontinent, beneath the Indian Ocean's Paradise Islands. Deep beneath the turquoise waters and idyllic volcanic islands of the Indian Ocean, like Mauritius and Reunion, lie the remnants of an ancient microcontinent named Mauritia. This isn't a vast landmass like Australia, but rather a collection of continental fragments, ribbons, and slivers that were once part of a much larger supercontinent. The story of Mauritia's discovery is a fascinating piece of geological detective work, relying on tiny clues found in unexpected places. For a long time, the volcanic origins of islands like Mauritius were thought to be the whole story, but a deeper, older narrative was waiting to be uncovered. The primary evidence from Mauritia comes from the study of zircons, incredibly durable minerals found in igneous rocks. In 2013, scientists studying beach sands on Mauritius found zircons that were far too old to have originated from the island's relatively young volcanic rocks, which are only about 9 million years old. These anomalous zircons dated back as far as 3 billion years. Such ancient zircons are typically found in continental crust, not in oceanic crust or young volcanic islands. This suggested that older continental material lay hidden beneath Mauritius. Further research involved analyzing trachyte rocks, a type of volcanic rock, from Mauritius itself. These trachytes, though young, also contained zircons of great antiquity, some over 2.5 billion years old. The interpretation was that as magma pushed up to form the volcanic island, it carried fragments of this ancient continental crust with it. More recently, sophisticated analysis of gravity fields in the Indian Ocean has provided further support. Continental crust is generally thicker and less dense than oceanic crust. By measuring minute variations in Earth's gravitational pull over the ocean, scientists can infer differences in crustal structure beneath the seabed. These studies revealed areas of unusually thick crust beneath the Mascarene Plateau, where Mauritius and Reunion are located, and extending in an arc towards Seychelles and India. This thicker crust is consistent with the presence of submerged continental fragments. These fragments are thought to have been part of the supercontinent Gondwana, which began breaking apart around 200 million years ago. What was Mauritia like before it was largely lost to the depths? As a microcontinent, it would have been a landmass, perhaps of varying topography, composed of ancient continental rocks. Its exact size and shape are still being pieced together, but it's envisioned as a series of elongated fragments that stretched between what are now India and Madagascar. When Gondwana was intact, Mauritia would have been wedged between these two larger landmasses. As India began its rapid northward journey, rifting away from Madagascar and Africa around 85 million years ago, fragments of Mauritia were stretched, thinned, and eventually separated, with some parts sinking beneath the newly forming Indian Ocean. Volcanic activity associated with the Reunion hotspot later covered many of these fragments with thick layers of lava, forming islands like Mauritius on top of this ancient continental foundation. The discovery of Mauritia challenges the traditional view of how continents break apart and how oceans form. It suggests that continental breakup can be a messy process, leaving behind splinters and ribbons of continental crust scattered across ocean basins, rather than always resulting in clean breaks. These lost pieces of continent can then be hidden beneath younger volcanic activity. For mapmakers, it means that the simple divide between oceanic and continental crust isn't always so clear-cut. There are transitional zones and hidden relics that tell a more complex story of Earth's tectonic past. Mauritia provides a window into the processes that shaped the Indian Ocean and the distribution of land masses, reminding us that even paradise islands can have deep ancient secrets buried beneath them, secrets that whisper of lands that once were. The search for more such fragments continues, potentially redrawing parts of the geological map of the ocean floor. Number 5. The Kerguelen Plateau, Antarctica's fiery twin that vanished. In the remote southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from any major landmass, lies a vast underwater feature called the Kerguelen Plateau. Most of it is submerged 1 to 2 kilometers, 0.6 to 1.2 miles, beneath the ocean's surface, but parts of it break the surface to form the Kerguelen Islands, also known as Desolation Islands, and Heard Island, and McDonald Islands. This plateau is enormous, covering an area roughly 3 times the size of Japan, or comparable to a small continent. For a long time, it was considered primarily an oceanic plateau formed by volcanic activity, but growing evidence suggests parts of it were once above sea level, forming a significant microcontinent covered in forests and inhabited by unique life forms. The evidence for Kerguelen's terrestrial past comes from scientific drilling expeditions, Ocean Drilling Program, ODB. Legs 119, 120, and 183 retrieved core samples from various locations on the plateau. Amazingly, some of these cores, drilled from sites now deep underwater, contained evidence of a subaerial, above-air-water environment. Scientists found layers of sediment containing fossilized wood, spores, pollen from ferns and flowering plants, angiosperms, and even fragments of charcoal, indicating ancient wildfires. Some samples included types of clay soils that form from the weathering of rocks exposed to the atmosphere, not underwater. These findings were particularly strong for the southern part of the Kerguelen Plateau. Geochemical analysis of volcanic rocks from the plateau also showed characteristics more typical of continental flood basalts rather than purely oceanic ones, hinting at continental crust influence. What kind of world existed on this lost microcontinent? Plant fossils suggest a temperate to cool temperate climate. There's evidence of conifer forests, perhaps similar to those found in parts of New Zealand or Tasmania today, with an understory of ferns. Presence of angiosperm pollen indicates that flowering plants had also established themselves. This was not a tropical paradise, but a vegetated landmass in high southern latitudes. This terrestrial phase is thought to have occurred primarily during the Cretaceous period from about 110 million to perhaps 85 million years ago. During this time, Kerguelen was connected to, or very close to, other parts of the Gondwana supercontinent, particularly India and Antarctica, before they drifted apart. This connection would have allowed for the exchange of flora and fauna. The submergence of the Kerguelen microcontinent was likely a combination of factors. Tectonic subsidence is a major one. As the volcanic activity that formed the plateau waned and the crust cooled, it would have naturally sunk lower. Sea level changes also played a role. The breakup of Gondwana involved significant crustal stretching and thinning in the region, which could have contributed to parts of Kerguelen sinking below the waves. The massive volcanic outpouring that created the plateau occurred over tens of millions of years, starting around 120 million years ago, associated with a mantle plume or hotspot. After the main construction phase, the landmass gradually subsided. Kerguelen Islands and Heard Island are relatively recent volcanic features built on top of the older, now largely submerged plateau. Kerguelen Plateau's story as a former microcontinent has significant implications for understanding past global geography, climate, and the dispersal of life. If it was a substantial landmass connecting other parts of Gondwana, it could have served as a biotic stepping stone or a refuge for various species during periods of environmental change. Its existence helps explain some puzzling biogeographical patterns, where related plant and animal groups are found in now widely separated southern continents like Australia, South America, Antarctica, and India. It means that the ancient map of the southern hemisphere needs to include this significant, albeit temporary, land feature. The Kerguelen Plateau is a testament to how dynamic the Earth's crust is, with landmasses rising from the ocean due to immense volcanic forces, flourishing for millions of years, and then slowly sinking back into the depths, leaving only tantalizing geological and fossil clues of their past existence. Number 4. Doggerland, Europe's flooded heartland. Beneath the choppy gray waters of the North Sea, between Great Britain and continental Europe, lies a vast drowned landscape known as Doggerland. This was not just a narrow land bridge, but an extensive area of plains, hills, river valleys, and coastlines that was inhabited by humans and teeming with wildlife during and after the last ice age. At its peak, Doggerland connected Britain to Denmark and the Netherlands, making Britain a peninsula of Europe. It was a heartland of Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age, Europe, and its gradual submergence over thousands of years profoundly shaped the lives of the people who called it home. The existence of Doggerland has been suspected for centuries, as fishermen occasionally dredged up strange finds, peat, ancient tree trunks, and the bones of land animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, and giant deer, Megaloceros. Sometimes, even human tools and artifacts made of bone or flint were found in their nets. In the early 20th century, paleontologist Clement Reid formally proposed the idea of a submerged land based on these finds. Modern technology has allowed scientists to map Doggerland in incredible detail. Seismic surveys originally conducted for oil and gas exploration have provided a 3D picture of the ancient landscape beneath the seabed, revealing river channels, lakes, estuaries, and even subtle hills and valleys. Sediment cores drilled from the North Sea floor have yielded pollen, plant remains, insect fragments, and microscopic fossils that help reconstruct the environment of Doggerland. What was Doggerland like when it was dry land? Evidence suggests it was a rich and varied landscape. After the ice sheets retreated, around 12,000 years ago, it was initially a tundra-like environment. But as the climate warmed, it transformed into a mosaic of woodlands, birch, pine, then later hazel and oak, grasslands, marshes, and extensive river systems. Major rivers, including ancient extensions of the Rhine, Thames, and Elbe, flowed across Doggerland, creating fertile floodplains. It would have been an ideal habitat for hunter-gatherer fisher communities. The abundance of animal bones and archaeological finds, like flint tools, harpoon points made of antler, and even possible evidence of wooden structures, indicates a thriving human population. They would have hunted game, fished in the rivers and estuaries, and gathered plants. Some researchers speculate that Doggerland was a Mesolithic paradise with plentiful resources. The demise of Doggerland was a slow, inexorable process driven by rising sea levels as the glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age. Between about 18,000 BCE and 5,500 BCE, global sea levels rose by approximately 120 meters, nearly 400 feet. Because Doggerland was a low-lying plain, it was particularly vulnerable. The inundation happened in stages. Initially, coastlines retreated, river valleys became wide estuaries, and low-lying areas turned into large lagoons and islands. People living there would have had to adapt continuously, moving to higher ground, changing their hunting and fishing strategies. Around 6,200 BC, a catastrophic event may have accelerated Doggerland's end, the Storga Slide. This was a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway which triggered a huge tsunami that swept across the remaining parts of Doggerland, likely devastating coastal communities and speeding up the flooding process. By around 5,500 BC, the last vestiges of Doggerland, perhaps a few low islands, were submerged, and Britain became fully separated from the European mainland. Doggerland's rediscovery dramatically changes our understanding of Mesolithic Europe. It wasn't just a sparsely populated fringe, it was a core area, a hub of human activity. Its loss represents a significant displacement of people and a transformation of the European landscape. The story of Doggerland provides a prehistoric parallel to modern concerns about climate change and rising sea levels, showing how human societies can be profoundly affected by such environmental shifts. Archaeologists are now actively exploring Doggerland, using advanced remote sensing and targeted core sampling, hoping to find more direct evidence of human settlements, perhaps even preserved campsites or burial sites. Piecing together the story of Doggerland helps us visualize a lost European world and understand the deep history of the lands beneath the North Sea, redrawing the map of human occupation in northwestern Europe. Number 3. The Thulean Land Bridge, when you could walk from Scotland to Greenland. Imagine a time when land stretched across the North Atlantic, connecting Europe to Greenland, and possibly even North America. This wasn't a continuous continent in the traditional sense, but a series of volcanic land masses and shallower seas, collectively often referred to as the Thulean Plateau, or sometimes parts of a hypothetical Icelandia land bridge. This bridge is thought to have existed during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, roughly 60 to 50 million years ago, a period of intense volcanic activity in the North Atlantic region. Its existence has profound implications for how plants and animals, including early mammals, dispersed between continents. The evidence for the Thulean Land Bridge is primarily geological. It's linked to the Iceland plume, a massive upwelling of hot rock from deep within the Earth's mantle, the same plume that formed Iceland itself. When the North Atlantic Ocean began to open as Greenland separated from northwestern Europe, specifically Norway and Scotland, this mantle plume caused enormous volcanic eruptions. These eruptions created vast plateaus of basaltic lava, both on land, like the Antrim lava group in Northern Ireland, the British Tertiary volcanic province in western Scotland, and similar formations in Greenland and Baffin Island, and beneath the sea, forming the Greenland-Scotland Ridge. Times these volcanic constructions, combined with thermally uplifted continental crust, may have been extensive enough to form a nearly continuous land connection, or at least a series of closely spaced islands across the nascent North Atlantic. Geologists study the composition and age of these volcanic rocks and use seismic data to map the structure of the crust beneath the ocean. The Greenland-Scotland Ridge, for example, is a major bathymetric feature that rises significantly above the surrounding abyssal plains. Parts of this ridge, like the Faroe Islands, are still above sea level. Paleontological evidence also lends support. Fossils of land animals and plants from the Paleocene and Eocene show surprising similarities between Europe and North America, suggesting they could migrate between these continents. For example, early primates and hoofed mammals appear in both regions around the same time. While Beringia was also a potential route, the Thulean Land Bridge offers an alternative or complementary pathway, especially for species adapted to warmer, more temperate climates than those likely found on the high-latitude Beringian route. Life on the Thulean Land Bridge itself would have been shaped by its volcanic nature and its high latitude, though globally warmer setting. Climate during the Paleocene, Eocene, thermal maximum, PETM, around 56 million years ago, was exceptionally warm, meaning even Arctic regions could support forests. The landscape was likely rugged, dominated by volcanic terrains, lava fields, and newly formed soils. Forests of conifers, ferns, and early flowering plants probably covered much of the land. Animals migrating across would have included early forms of horses, primates, rodents, and various extinct mammal groups. It wouldn't have been an easy crossing, perhaps, but a feasible one for populations to spread over generations. The Thulian Land Bridge didn't last forever. As volcanic activity associated with the initial rifting and plume waned, and as the newly formed oceanic crust between Greenland and Europe cooled and subsided, the land connections gradually sank beneath the waves. This process occurred through the Eocene. By about 40 to 35 million years ago, the deep water passages of the North Atlantic were well established, severing the direct land route. The Faroe Islands and Iceland, which is much younger, mostly formed in the last 20 million years, are essentially the most prominent remaining vestiges of this massive volcanic system. The Thulian Land Bridge hypothesis reshapes our understanding of intercontinental faunal and floral exchange during a critical period in Earth's history, just after the extinction of the dinosaurs when mammals were diversifying rapidly. Provides a crucial link in the puzzle of how similar life forms appeared on continents, now separated by a vast ocean. It highlights how large-scale geological processes, like mantle plumes and continental rifting, can create temporary land connections that have long-lasting impacts on the global distribution of life. Mapping out these ancient, transient bridges helps us to reconstruct a more complete picture of Earth's past geography and the dynamic pathways that shaped the living world. Number 2. Antarctica's Green Past, a lost world beneath the ice. When you picture Antarctica, you see a vast, white, frozen continent, a desolate expanse of ice and snow. But this image is only a snapshot in geological time. For much of its history, Antarctica was not covered in ice. It was a land of forests, rivers, and diverse animal life, situated in much warmer latitudes and part of larger supercontinents. The lost continent of Antarctica is not one that sank beneath the waves, but one whose vibrant ecosystems and temperate landscapes have been buried under kilometers of ice for millions of years. A green world now lost to us, except through the tantalizing clues left in the rock and fossil record. The evidence for Antarctica's warmer, greener past is compelling and comes from various scientific investigations. Paleontologists have discovered numerous fossils across the continent, particularly in areas where ancient rocks are exposed, like the Antarctic Peninsula and the Transantarctic Mountains. These include fossils of Glossopteris, a seed fern characteristic of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, dating back over 250 million years. More surprisingly, discoveries from more recent geological periods, the Mesozoic and early Cenozoic eras from about 250 million to 34 million years ago, paint an even lusher picture. Fossilized wood leaves, pollen, and spores from temperate rainforests, including beech trees, Nothofagus, podocarp, conifers, and ferns have been found. Some sites like Seymour Island off the Antarctic Peninsula have yielded fossils of flowering plants indicating a relatively mild climate, even as recently as the Eocene epoch, around 50 million years ago. Animal fossils tell a similar story. Dinosaur remains, including ankylosaurs, hypsilophodontids, and even a large theropod related to Tyrannosaurus rex, have been unearthed, showing that these giant reptiles roamed Antarctica during the Cretaceous period when it was still connected to Australia and South America. Fossil evidence of early mammals, marsupials, amphibians, reptiles, and freshwater fish has also been found. For example, marine reptile fossils like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs are common in coastal deposits, indicating warm seas around the continent. Presence of these animals and plants means that Antarctica, even when situated near the South Pole, experienced climates warm enough to support complex ecosystems, likely due to much higher global concentrations of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. What was this green Antarctica-like. During the warmest periods, like the mid-Cretaceous or the early Eocene, parts of Antarctica would have resembled modern-day New Zealand or Patagonia, with temperate rainforests. There would have been distinct seasons, including long, dark winters and summers with continuous daylight, due to its polar position, but temperatures rarely dropped low enough for permanent ice sheets to form, except perhaps on high mountains. Rivers flowed across the land, and diverse fauna thrived in these forests and waterways. Imagine herds of dinosaurs browsing through fern-filled undergrowth beneath canopies of southern beech trees with ancient mammals scurrying below. The transition to the frozen continent we know today began around 34 million years ago at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary. This was when the first significant ice sheets started to form, initially in East Antarctica. Several factors contributed to this dramatic climate shift. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current developed as Antarctica separated from South America, opening the Drake Passage and Australia, isolating the continent thermally. Global carbon dioxide levels also began a long-term decline. This cooling trend continued, with major ice sheet expansion occurring around 14 million years ago in the Miocene and Antarctica becoming almost entirely ice-covered, as it is today by about 2 to 3 million years ago. The vast ice sheets scoured the land, burying the ancient landscapes and their ecosystems. Understanding Antarctica's green past profoundly changes our perception of the continent and its role in Earth's systems. It shows that polar regions are not inherently icy, but can support rich biotas under different global climate conditions. The fossil record from Antarctica provides crucial data for understanding how life adapts to high-latitude environments and how ecosystems respond to major climate transitions. It also gives us a baseline for understanding the potential impacts of future climate change. If Antarctica was largely ice-free with higher CO2 levels in the past, it provides insights into its potential future in a warming world. The lost world beneath Antarctic ice is a reminder of Earth's incredible climatic variability and the deep history preserved in even the most inhospitable places on the planet. Uncovering more of this lost world continues to reshape our maps of ancient life and climate. Number 1. Zealandia, the eighth continent, hiding in plain sight. For decades, school children have learned about 7 continents. But what if there's an 8th, largely hidden beneath the Southwest Pacific Ocean? Meet Zealandia, also known by its Maori name, Te Reo, a Maui. It's not a mythical land, but a scientifically recognized landmass that is about 4.9 million square kilometers, 1.9 million square miles. In area, roughly half the size of Australia, or 2/3 the size of the continental United States. The catch? About 94% of Zealandia is submerged, with only its highest points, New Zealand and New Caledonia, poking above the waves. This is not just a collection of islands or a continental fragment. Geologists argue it meets all the criteria to be considered a continent in its own right. The evidence for Zealandia's continent status has been building for years. Continents are generally defined by several features: high elevation relative to the surrounding oceanic crust, a wide range of igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks, a thicker crust than oceanic crust, and a well-defined area. Zealandia ticks these boxes. Bathymetric mapping of the ocean floor, clearly shows a large, coherent area of elevated seabed surrounding New Zealand and New Caledonia, distinct from the deeper abyssal plains. Geological sampling from dredging and drilling reveals that this submerged landmass is made of continental crust, granites, schists, and greywax, not the dense basaltic rock that forms typical oceanic crust. Crust of Zealandia is significantly thicker, 10 to 30 km or 6 to 19 miles, locally up to 40 kilometers under parts of the South Island of New Zealand, than oceanic crust. Typically around 7 km or 4 miles thick, though it is thinner than most other continents. Its area is large and well-defined. Zealandia's story begins as part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, alongside Antarctica and Australia. Around 85 to 105 million years ago, Zealandia began to rift away and separate from Gondwana. As it stretched and thinned during this separation, much of its landmass gradually subsided beneath the ocean. This process was complex, involving tectonic forces, pulling it apart and causing it to sink. Unlike other continents that remained largely above sea level, most of Zealandia became submerged. However, it didn't break into tiny scattered fragments. It remained largely intact as a coherent slab of continental crust. Parts that remain above water, New Zealand and New Caledonia, represent the highest mountain ranges and plateaus of this mostly drowned continent. What was Zealandia like when more of it was above water? Fossil evidence from New Zealand and New Caledonia, as well as from drill cores from submerged areas, gives us clues. During the Cretaceous and early Cenozoic periods, Zealandia would have had a much larger land area. It supported diverse flora, including podocarp and beech forests, and a unique fauna that evolved in isolation after it separated from Gondwana. Dinosaurs roamed Zealandia, and early forms of birds, reptiles like the tuatara, and possibly primitive mammals made it their home. Climate would have varied across its extent, but large parts likely experienced temperate conditions. The subsequent submergence dramatically reduced the available land, leading to extinctions and forcing life to adapt to smaller, more isolated island environments. The iconic kiwi, moa, now extinct, and unique flora of New Zealand are all part of Zealandia's long evolutionary story. The recognition of Zealandia as a continent has several important implications. It challenges our traditional definitions of what a continent is, particularly regarding how much needs to be above sea level. It refines our understanding of plate tectonics and how continental crust behaves during rifting and subsidence. For resource management, recognizing Zealandia's full extent is important for defining continental shelf boundaries and managing any potential undersea resources according to international law. From a biogeographical perspective, it explains many unique features of New Zealand's and New Caledonia's flora and fauna, highlighting their deep evolutionary history on a larger, now mostly submerged landmass. It provides a more accurate geological map of our planet. Learning about Zealandia is like finding a massive piece of a puzzle that was always there, just mostly hidden from view. It shows that even our fundamental understanding of the world's land masses can evolve with new scientific discoveries, literally reshaping the maps we use to define our planet.